Welcome into Flag for Discussion, episode 57 for Wednesday, December 31st. Happy New Year's Eve, everybody. I feel like we've started the last 5 shows with the happy and some holiday, but happy New Year's Eve, everybody. I hope you're going to be happy, safe, and having a lot of fun tonight. My name is Farbod Mercati here, as always, with Jace Hatfield. Well, not the last couple of weeks, not the last week at least, but we got Jace Hatfield back. The boys are back. We are previewing the quarterfinals of the college football playoff in today's show. So much to talk about, so much we've almost missed, but it's good to have a game week back for the playoff. Jace, are we feeling, did you miss us?
Oh, terribly. As much fun as the holidays are, the eating, the drinking, the having a good time with family and friends and stuff, you got to miss the podcast. I was, like the Spider-Man meme where he's kind of grazing the photo. That was me listening to the podcast, just yearning for being with you on here. But great shows. They were both fantastic. Gave the second one a listen to today at work, which was a nice little 45-minute to an hour preview. I thought you did a great job. Couldn't agree more with you on the Kyle Whittingham hire as well. I wanted to say my piece because I agree with you. A home run hire. Unbelievable to be in the position they were in at the time that they were in and then walk away with one of the two best hires, in my opinion, of the offseason. So well done on the Michigan side.
Who was the best hire?
I think in terms of how much is going to upgrade the program, I think Virginia Tech with James Franklin.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. No, yeah. There was, I think when I was preparing for the Kyle Whittingham conversation, I was like, do I care more about how good of a coach he is and what he's going to do at Michigan? Or do I just want to tell the people who are saying that it was a bad hire how wrong they are?
I think you did a good job with both.
Well, I appreciate the compliments. Oh, I'm always receptive to compliments for anyone out there. But we got plenty to talk about. It's obviously New Year's. We might have some New Year's resolutions by the end of the show. The point of today's show in general is the quarterfinal of the college football playoff kicks off tonight on the 31st, and then the rest of the games are tomorrow on January 1st on the new year of 2026. Last year, Jace, we saw that the teams with the bye, so this year it's Ohio State, Indiana, Texas Tech, and Georgia. Last year, those teams went 0-4 in the quarterfinals. So, the Oregons of the world, they were number one throughout the year. They went wire to wire. They were the best teams in the country. And then they had 28 or so days off from their conference championship until they played in the quarterfinal of the playoff, and they lost. Texas, I think, won. But long story short, is this a trend that we're going to see going forward, starting tonight? Or is this a kind of a 1-year sample size isn't enough for me to know?
It's a great question. I think objectively, the one-size sample size is probably the right answer. But I'm actually going to buy that take a little bit and do think it's somewhat of a trend. I can say, as I was prepping for the show and reviewing these games, I feel confident that if they played 10 times in normal circumstances, the favorites in these games would win over half of them. But unfortunately, when you go to preview these games, you have to remember these. I started thinking, this team hasn't played football in 4 weeks. This other team played a week and a half ago. And it does kind of impacts the way that you kind of come into these games. Obviously, we have a really bad taste in our mouths of it, but I'll refer to it because I know what it feels like when I was watching Oregon play in the Rose Bowl.
I was at that game.
It's just, you could tell it took 15 to 30 minutes before they finally kind of got their head in the game and realized what was going on. And obviously by then it was way too late. And for a lot of these teams, I don't expect any blowouts. I think that was probably an outlier. I don't expect a blowout like that to happen again. But there is a world where if you look at Ole Miss, Georgia, they had an 8-point game, one of those games where both teams were just scoring constant touchdowns early in the season. Now it's at a neutral site. That one was in Athens. And also Georgia hasn't played in 4 weeks. So I do think we've seen scenarios where, hey, Georgia was a touchdown better than Ole Miss earlier in this year. Are they going to be that way again? To be determined. Obviously, we'll find that one out tomorrow. But something.
Yeah, there's a natural aspect of, you and I have been, and we'll get into Texas Tech, Oregon in 20 or so minutes. But there's a natural aspect of just your mind thinks. Texas Tech, you and I have been huge supporters of all season. We love Joey McGuire. We've been like, they don't just beat teams, they kill teams. And they're a really damn good team. But they also, one of the detractions from them is that they haven't necessarily played a team like Oregon, and that's not necessarily to say that they're going to lose to Oregon, but how do you combine 28 days off without hitting anyone but your own team in practice to all of a sudden getting almost shell shocked by playing a team as good as Oregon, as fast as Oregon, as physical as Oregon? Like, where's that? Like, how do you prepare your team to do that? And there's not even a way. I don't know if it's a trend or just the 1 year sample size. I do think, though, we've heard and seen enough coaches like Dan Lanning has come out and talked down on the playoff structure. We've seen enough people and coaches basically to say, guys, we got to fix this. We shouldn't be playing this late. This shouldn't be happening. And obviously, part of that is because of bowl contracts, the Rose Bowl, the Sugar Bowl. Like, these games want to be played on the first, and they have that contract with the playoff, and that's one of the reasons it's delayed this long. But man, it's mind-boggling that our playoff is the way it is.
Yeah, we'll definitely this offseason, we'll hash out the whole scheduling, pros, cons, goods, bads, the ugly, how we would prefer it. But it is, I think, the combination of the bye week, and then we kind of alluded to this with Dan Lanning, him saying, this game should be played in Lubbock, and a few other coaches have supported the idea of playing more, even many talking heads, even the ESPN game day crew said this the first round, sorry. These games are so fun on campus. They've made the argument of we should do more on campus and not be so quick to get out of campuses and so quick to get into neutral sites. And I think I agree with that. So I think there's going to be a huge overhaul of playoff structure. But like you said, it's all contingent upon money and TV deals with bowl games and where those are played at. I think the committee and whoever's in charge of this decisions, I think they know the beauty of on-campus games. I think they know the beauty of getting the schedule right. I think they probably at this point know the detriment of the bye week, but it's how do we navigate those things with all of these contracts that have now been signed that are worth millions and millions, probably hundreds of millions of dollars among, bowl games, TV deals, all that good stuff. So it's going to be messy, but I'm excited to hash that out with you this offseason.
I mean, if you think about it, the Rose Bowl, I don't know if it gives them more or less leverage. If UCLA is potentially going to leave, that still is a weird situation that we don't know a ton about. But if UCLA is potentially going to leave, do they have more leverage to be like, put their foot in the ground? Is like, this has to be played on January 1st, whenever that contract is up and ready to be renewed? Or do they have less leverage of the playoffs saying, well, we're the only thing you have now, so you have to play it a little bit earlier? I don't know entirely, but I think we have to get into the Cotton Bowl. Miami going to play Ohio State in Texas. Ohio State's a 9.5-point favorite. That's tonight, 7:30 Eastern on ESPN. Ohio State played at Jerry's World last year against the University of Texas in the third round of the playoff. They're making a home there. They're back there now. Now, I have a couple of takes on all the games that we want, but I want you to, when I was thinking about this game, I think you and I fully, for most of the rest of the regular season, we just said Ohio State's a juggernaut. They're not like super scary as they were last year in terms of how fast they are, how explosive they are, but like the defense, they had like the most games amongst the Power 5, Power 4, with giving up less than 17 points. The offense has still been good. They have the best players in college football on both sides of the ball. What makes me curious about this game on the Ohio State side is, has Ryan Day perfected the transitioning from regular season to the playoff? Where a couple years ago, not 2023, they missed the playoffs. 2022, they made the 14 playoff, and CJ Stroud all year was a top prospect in scouts' minds, in the NFL scouts' minds. And in that playoff game against Georgia, despite losing because of a missed field goal, CJ Stroud ran. CJ Stroud threw. He threw for over 330 yards. He ran for like 30, 40 yards. He made himself a top 5 guy. And part of that was because Ryan Day just said, all right, it's time to unleash. And we're going to be aggressive. We're going to not hold anything back. Last year, obviously, we saw against Tennessee and Oregon, they just went for the knockout right away. They didn't hold anything back. The difference between the Ohio State that we saw from the Big Ten title game to Ohio State that we'll see tonight is that Brian Hartline is not calling plays anymore. He's still on the staff and helping out the team prepare, but Ryan Day is taking that over again. I'm curious to see, is there any truth or validity to Ohio State becoming their 2.0 self in the playoff, and if Ryan Day's perfected that, or if they are who we think they are, is like a really damn good team, but maybe that offense can get got.
That's the $1 million question that Miami's defensive line will probably dictate the actual answer to. But my prediction for it would be I do think Ryan Day has figured out some version of a formula to keep guys focused, to make guys hungrier than they've been all season. We call it out all the time, the Kirby Smart, Nick Saban psychopath ability to convince you that you're the underdog and convince you that nobody believes in you, even though you are clearly not the underdog and clearly everyone believes in you, but just the ability to convince you of that. I think Ryan Day's got a little bit of that because for some reason Ohio State always comes into these big games with just massive chips on their shoulder. Again, how he does it, I have no idea. I wish I did. I could probably be a football coach if I did. I do think there's a little bit of truth to that, and I do expect to see a better. I think people saw Miami and kind of have some confidence. We'll get into our picks later. Not that they can't win, but I do think Ohio State is going to somehow use that as a chip on their shoulder mentality, and they're going to come out a little bit better than most people expect them to.
Yeah, so that's the question, right? Because last year, Ohio State played Michigan, they lost. We know that. And then everyone was picking them to lose in the first round to Tennessee. They go out and smoke them. Everyone was picking them to probably meet their maker against Oregon in the Rose Bowl. They go out, not only smoke them, they did a lot worse things than just smoke them. And then obviously they went off and won the national title, beating a couple more teams after that. But I think like the question between comparing them from last year to this year is this year's defense is obviously even better somehow, despite replacing all the guys that they did last year. But if you just want to take a micro sample size, and it might be unfair, Ohio State's played 2 top 20 offenses this year. They scored 7 against Texas and they scored 10 against Indiana. They beat Texas 14 as they lost to Indiana 13-10. They missed a field goal against Indiana. Yeah, that would have tied it, whatever. But in the games that they've played against the top 20 elite defenses in the country, that offense hasn't been as good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious now that they're going up against a Miami defense that if you asked me last year, would we be calling them an elite defense? I'd be like, you're out of your mind. But what Corey Heatherman and Mario Cristobal and that personnel staff have done at Miami with fixing up the secondary, just the defensive line in general, we saw what they did to A&M. And I know it was really windy there, so neither offense could really throw the ball much. But they sacked the shifty quarterback in Marcel Reed 7 times. They had 9 tackles for loss. Might be like I might be a prisoner of the moment, but Julian Sand is a really good quarterback. He's extremely smart, makes good decisions. He's not as shifty as Marcel Reed. The offensive line probably, I don't know, you'll probably give the edge for Ohio State compared to A&M, but still, I might be a prisoner of the moment, but I feel like the 9.5 is more so just giving Ohio State credit because of the brand rather than like, I feel like Miami's at least going to be covering this.
Yeah, you hit it spot on. And the talking point you're going to hear from everybody is going to be the Miami D line versus Ohio State's O line and the youth of the Ohio State backfield. Julian Sand being young, Bo Jackson is now kind of the far and away premier back. He's also a freshman, same with Sand. So you do kind of worry, and I think that's the right conversation. That's where you kind of analyze this game. You saw what happened to Marcel Reed. He's more experienced, he's older, and he's shiftier than Julian Sand. Also, in the 2 games in which Ohio State played top 20 defenses and they played really good D lines, low scoring outcomes. It was Texas early. Granted, that was the first week of the season, but then Indiana, the Big Ten championship, they only scored 10 points. Indiana's D line was feasting on Ohio State. They were getting to Julian Sand. They were disguising blitzes, similar to the way they beat Dante Moore in Oregon. It was, you could tell that just the defensive scheme confused Sand in this game. You could tell that the offensive line was missing blocks, communication was off. And next thing you know, they find themselves scoring 10 points in a loss. They're definitely going to have learned from that. But I also think that was the last football game you played 4 weeks ago. Now you're playing arguably an even better defensive line than that in Miami. And a Miami defensive line that just put out one of the best performances we've seen in quite a long time and arguably all season from any D-line in the country. So they carry that momentum because you can't get satisfied. You can't be, man, all right, we did it, thankfully. I think you got to stay hungry. And if they do, that they could potentially pull off an upset. And I'm with you. 9.5 is a lot of points given how good of a defensive line that is.
And I've been going back and forth on like my prediction for this game. By the way, picks will be made in our last segment of the show. So we're going to be talking to you about our leans in these previews.
Mhm.
The picks will be in the last segment. Look, I was thinking about this earlier. I don't know if this sounds weird to you. I feel like Miami's game script, ideal game script, they can't have a 10-3 low scoring output like they did against Texas A&M. They also don't want a 35-38 high scoring output like they did like they've done in the past years. They can't get into a shootout with Ohio State because I just trust Julian Say and Jeremiah Smith and that Bo Jackson and Ryan Day and that offense to get that one more score. And I also don't think like if neither team can score and it's 7-7 with 6 minutes left, I just trust Ryan Day and that staff to manage the clock better, to to handle the last couple of minutes, and to pop one big play to Jeremiah Smith to get them in a field goal range. And not that Malachi Tony, Carson Beck, and that team can't do that, but I think for Miami to get down the field, they have to rely on that offensive line. They have to rely on Mark Fletcher. And if all else fails, and maybe you can argue that Carson Beck isn't great. I have stats in front of me that say he's been pretty damn good in the last 5 games. The Texas A&M game, it just was so windy. No one was going to be able to throw the ball, and they had the offensive line they do. They have the running game they do. I think if push comes to shove against Ohio State, you got to get those big tackles in space. You got to get those guards in space. Start pulling whatever it needs. Get the run game going, and see if you can start pulling off chunks of yardage against Ohio State. I think Miami has a real path to winning. Now, I think I would have called myself crazy like 3 weeks ago if I said that.
Yeah, I agree. And something to note, this is a really big game in terms of what the bye week does to a team, because I think Miami has a lot of momentum. Like you said, Carson Beck's been playing his best football the last few weeks. Mark Fletcher had arguably his most impressive game of the season last week. They didn't even need to dip into Gerard Pringle at all against Texas A&M. So they've been hot. The D-line, as we
Right.
just said, played one of the best games of the season. They've been hot. And on the flip side, it's an Ohio State team that's last game was 4 weeks ago, and it was a rough outing for the Buckeyes as a team from a whole, losing 13-10. Does the bye, if the bye week is truly painful and truly impactful, I can see a world where Miami comes out and Carson Beck continues to play well. The offensive line for Miami creates run holes for Mark Fletcher, and he has a big game. And Malachi Tony then can beat you in multiple ways. Like, if the momentum is true and the momentum is real, Miami has a very clear path to winning this football game. Ohio State also has the ability to just shut the door on the bye week narrative, because if Ohio State comes out as the version of Ohio State that was when everyone was like, yep, they're back to back, like, we don't even need to play the championship this year.
Right.
Like, that's how good they were. And if the bye week doesn't matter and they just come out and look like that, well, no matter how hot Miami was, I don't know if it'll be enough. So this will be a big game to prove.
And that's what we'll find out tonight. And I think I want to just ask some Ohio State questions in a second because we've been focusing mostly on Miami. But I just want to point out one more thing that makes me feel like Miami has a real shot to win this game. And mind you, I say real shot because everyone expects Ohio State to win this game. But you want to point out like the potential for upset. Not only is the bye week a factor for Ohio State, but Miami, I would argue, has been playing playoff games since November 1st. They took their second loss to SMU on November 1st. Realistically, they didn't know if they were in or out, but they knew they had to win out and they knew they had to look good. Granted, these are worse teams than what they'll play in the playoff, but they beat Syracuse 38-10. They beat NC State 41-7. They beat Virginia Tech 34-17, Pitt 38-7, and then they beat Texas A&M on the road in the first round of the playoffs 10-3. Every game has been a must-win and must look good for them to be here. So I don't think the sense of urgency is out for Miami, and I think that's one of the reasons they just last week said instead of just keep trying to fit a square peg in a round hole and having Carson try to force the ball out and try to throw the ball, they were like, well, we got these big ass offensive linemen, we got a really good running back. Well, let's let them take control. Now, what for Ohio State, obviously, Matt Patricia, that defense, there's nothing more than Bill Belichick disciples like to do than confuse young quarterbacks. And I know that Carson Beck's a veteran college quarterback, but when you have Caleb Downs, you can just place him on any side of the field. When you have Arvell Reese in that defense in general, that Ohio State does, There's nothing Matt Patricia would like to do more than confuse Carson Beck and put him into one of those Louisville type games, because Carson Beck, he's last 5 games over 1,200 yards, 12 touchdowns, 1 interception. He's been completing at a 78% completion percentage clip. He's been excellent. But we've also seen him have 3 interception games, 4 interception games. If he loses his confidence early on, especially like not knowing, like with Matt Patricia disguising things and Caleb Downs being all over the field, if they're not able to run the ball, it could be a very long day for Miami.
Yeah, that's the big Carson Beck weakness, is like when he loses confidence or when he gets rattled, it's a slippery slope for him. There's not really much of a make a mistake and bounce back out of him. So Ohio State, yeah, absolutely. They have all the ability in the world to confuse Carson Beck, force a turnover out of him. And once you get him reeling, it could be a long day for the Miami offense. And something else, Ohio State, to give them a little bit of a lean here. Something we saw last year so we all knew Jeremiah Smith was a stud last regular season. He was just they were kind of using him in a pretty standard fashion for most of the regular season last year. And then coming to the playoff, they got way more creative with him. You saw screen passes he took to the house. You saw deep balls he took to the house. We really started to see the Jeremiah Smith that we know. And this season, it feels like he kind of went back to regular season Jeremiah Smith, where he's really good when they need him, but they don't really rely on him. They don't get him the wear and tear that he probably doesn't need, because they don't need him in a lot of these games. So, Miami defensive line, fantastic for sure. But I could see a world where Jeremiah Smith takes 2 or 3 screen passes for 30 plus yards, quick drag routes, quick hitters over the middle. I don't think Miami has seen a wide receiver 1 or a wide receiver 2 or arguably a wide receiver 3 as good as these guys. And their secondary, which has been much better this year than last year, I also don't think has been. Last week against Texas A&M would have been the test, but with the wind, I mean, the goalposts were literally shaking, and throwing a football in the wind is virtually impossible. This will be like the first true test for the Miami secondary, and one that I don't think they've had quite yet this season.
No, and that's the question, right? With how does Ohio State come back from this, like how we let off this segment in general. I think Ryan Day calling plays, I've seen people online say that's going to hurt them. It's going to, because Ryan Day, heading into not this season, last season, gave up play calling. They hired Bill O'Brien, and then Bill O'Brien left 2 weeks later for the Boston College job. They hired Chip Kelly. And the point of that was, Ryan Day, I want to be the CEO head coach. I want to handle everything else that there is to being a head coach, not just play calling and offensive preparation. Because there's, like, against Georgia, they gave up 42 points and lost that playoff game. And part of that conversation is like, well, he wants to be around. He wants to be around everybody, get a feel for everybody instead of just the offense. Now he has to go back to calling plays and being heavily involved in the offensive preparation. I don't think it's going to hurt them, man. For what it's worth, Matt Patricia has been a head coach in the NFL. Now, it's been for the Detroit Lions, and you don't love him, but Matt Patricia's at a level where Ryan Day can basically tell him, "You're the head coach of the defense. I'll see you on Saturday, or I'll see you on Wednesday." And I also think maybe for long-term regular season, where the head coach has fundraising responsibilities, NIL responsibilities, has to meet with donors, has to meet with collectives, has to meet with just recruits in general. That is very important for him not to be directly involved in play calling. But I also think, like, in a one-off playoff game or several one-off playoff games, having the guy who made his name in the sport as an offensive coordinator is huge for Ohio State. So I think there's a chance Ohio State comes out guns blazing, extremely aggressive, and it's not that spread would end up just making me look stupid saying Miami could be in this. Like, there's a chance that Ohio State comes out, takes another 21-3 lead, and then it's over.
Yeah, I'm with you. I do not think that Ryan Day being the play caller in this game really changes much for Ohio State offense. Between the
I think it almost
talent they
helps them.
have, yeah, the talent they have is there. It's not like that's weak. That changes. And also, Brian Hartline, yes, he left. He left long enough ago that I feel like they've had plenty of time to adjust and figure it out. And they haven't really lost many staffers beyond him. So it's not like they're, 4 or 5 staffers also deep gone. They at least have a lot of those guys, position coaches, still in the room, which I think helps just kind of keep things steady. And Brian Hartline was there with Ryan Day long enough that I think Ryan Day knows what he's doing pretty comfortably.
Well, yeah, and Ryan Day made his name at Ohio State as the offensive coordinator. He called plays as the head coach up until 2 years ago. This isn't anything he hasn't done before. And honestly, you could argue his offenses were better when he was calling them rather than even when Chip was calling them. So I don't think that's going to have an effect. It's just really for me, and to cap it off, the battle of how does Miami, if Miami's offensive line is able to get a push, this is going to be a ball game. Like this is
Yep.
going to be a close game. If Miami's offensive line isn't going to help them run the ball, and Carson Beck's going to be sitting back there on 3rd and 7s a lot, and being forced to throw the ball, being forced to try to make a play, he'll make some, but there's going to be a couple mistakes. So that's where I think that that's where I think the 9.5 really comes into play. Is Miami able to get a push and keep the game close and maybe squeak one out, or is Ohio State going to steamroll?
It almost feels like either Miami pulls off the upset or Ohio State steamrolls. I think Vegas is banking on Carson Beck to get confused by the Ohio State defense, it feels like.
Right.
Because I think you either get a legendary Carson Beck performance and a win, or you get the three plus turnover, completes 50% of his passes, and it's just it's over by the end of the third quarter kind of game.
Yeah. All right. We'll get your picks for that at the end of the show. Let's get into the Billionaire Bowl, better known as the Orange Bowl. Obviously, Billionaire Bowl because the only thing people like to talk about with Texas Tech is Cody Campbell, their billionaire oil tycoon who's been funding their roster. The only thing people like to hate about Oregon is Phil Knight and their billionaire. So it's the Billionaire Bowl. Really excited about this game. Really dumb that it's in Miami. I mean, I get it, bowls, whatever, but like you're making a team from Texas and a team from Oregon go to Miami to play football. This game obviously hits home for us. And you just mentioned a fact about Ohio State, and they haven't lost a ton of staffers. Oregon's being pillaged right now. Not only have they lost both coordinators, but both coordinators are taking like the entire analyst pool. Like I think Will Science taken multiple offensive staffers and a couple defensive staffers. Josh Lufoy has taken multiple defensive staffers and special team staffers. So Oregon, I wonder where the staff and the support is at right now. But you mentioned that, and I was like, huh. I wonder how that bodes for Oregon.
Yeah, they're in the opposite boat. I think they're into double digits of staffers, analysts, people in the building that are now going to be elsewhere after this season. So that's got to be the most. It's got to be a record in terms of playoff teams. So that's going to be a big hit, and I think that it's interesting because when you look at this game, in terms of statistics, there's really not an edge for either of these teams. Both these teams are very statistically sound, offensively, defensively, in the run game, in the pass game. They both play similar styles of football. They kind of lean on explosive plays offensively, and they set those up well with a good ground game. They have quarterbacks with great arms. They have good playmaking wide receivers. And then defensively, they've both been really good. The lean defensively would be Texas Tech. Incredible at forcing turnovers. I believe they forced over 50, which is the most in the country this year. Saw Jacob Rodriguez was probable. I did not know he was banged up, but that's something to follow a little bit.
He'll play. There's no way he won't.
Interesting to see him there on the probable list. But statistically, did you find any edges? Because I struggled to really find anything that felt good.
The argument here in general is actually there's a twofold argument. It depends on if you're just talking about opponents or just how like the team play style. The first argument is Oregon has a number 22 strength of schedule. They finished 12-1. Texas Tech finished 11-1. They have the number 65 strength of schedule. And Josh Pate said this. I'm not trying to copy him, but he's basically said like Texas Tech hasn't really had a point of reference on their schedule outside of the Big 12 for us to really know how they compare to the rest of the conferences. And granted, I also want to point out something he didn't. Oregon really hasn't either. They played Oklahoma State, but they played a bad Oklahoma State. They played Montana State and Oregon State. But it's not like Oregon has had a ton of outside of the Big 10 matchups, really. But because of the teams in the Big 10 are just generally a little better than the Big 12, the strength of schedule is better. And they played Indiana in general. Texas Tech, while they've been dominant, while they've been so good, they have played a couple, just mostly Big 12 schools. They have two like conference opponents. Both played Oregon State and Oklahoma State, and they both destroyed both of those teams as expected. So that in general, if you want to talk about strength of schedule, talk about maybe Texas Tech hasn't played a team like Oregon That's one edge that you can find. I would say whenever people make those arguments, it's like, you're probably right, but also I don't know how that impacts a really well coached team with all the talent that Texas Tech does. I mean, you could argue that Oregon hasn't played a team like Texas Tech. And then I know I'm rambling. The second edge that I could find is if Oregon falls behind, even by 7, that's where Texas Tech wants you. They haven't spent much time this year behind. And when they are ahead, that's when they can, their defensive ends, their defensive line can pin their ears back and just get after the quarterback. Quarterback doesn't have much time to throw. He's prone to making mistakes. That's where those interceptions are coming from too, because that defensive line is one of the best in the country. But when you are ahead, you can really send those guys after the quarterback and risk giving up some explosives. But if Oregon gets up on them, we don't know how Texas Tech's going to react because they've really only been behind once in their loss.
Yeah. The ability for both these teams to come back, we haven't had to see much. Yes, Oregon had a successful one against Iowa, but even then it wasn't like it was one drive they had to come back. They were winning for the previous 58 minutes or whatever it was. Neither of these teams have much experience playing down like for the majority of the second half. When Oregon had to do it against Indiana, it was a tie game with 10 minutes left. They go down. That's when they played their worst football. Like you just said, that's when you get the interceptions, and that's when a defense like Texas Tech thrives. In the Big 12 championship game, that was really the only time Texas Tech had to play down. They started off slow, but they were able to make that up in the second quarter, and then it didn't matter. I guess the Arizona State game was one they also could not come back in, where they found themselves down in the second half. So both teams kind of 0 for 1 in their one chance at a comeback, and both of those were week 3 or 4. So it'll be very interesting to see how these two teams start, because you looked at the Oregon JMU game. Oregon started incredibly hot. That was one of the hottest starts I've ever seen in my life from any performance. And you want to hope that not having the bye week, that carries over. You're hot, you're fresh, you're ready to go. Texas Tech, you haven't played in 4 weeks, and the last time you played it was BYU. What's the comparison between playing BYU, playing Oregon, and then not playing for 4 weeks? You can't start slow. This is definitely a game where if someone gets down 7, I'll say 10 to 14 points, I really see them to struggle to try and get back into this game. Oregon's defense is at its best when teams are trying to throw on them. Texas Tech's defense is also at its best when teams are trying to throw on them. So definitely not a game you want to find yourself down in. And if you do, I think you cannot hit the panic button. You have to force these defenses to stay honest with the run game, even if you are down multiple scores.
The path to winning for Oregon, and I was thinking about this earlier, you might think I'm crazy. We know Dan Lanning as a always defer guy. If Oregon wins the toss, they'll defer to the second half, except against JMU when they wanted to go out and just score right away. I would almost recommend, if you win the toss, go take the ball, score. Try to get up, because I mean, even it's completely different teams. But when Oregon went down to Lubbock 2 years ago, they got behind pretty early. It took a pretty miraculous performance by Bo Nix and Troy Franklin to bring him back, and then an interception pick 6 by Jeff Bossa to win the game. Texas Tech's one of those teams that if they get ahead on you, they can steamroll you because they can just run right over you. They're a momentum based team. That defense, if they have the lead, they'll get after the quarterback. They'll turn you over, and they'll make it really hard on you to come back. And that's where we saw with Dante Moore. If Dante Moore against most opponents has been very poised, very together, very active, was able to make throws in tough situations, throws the ball away well. But against Indiana, when he started getting hit out of places that he wasn't expecting, we saw like the confidence, we saw the vibe just go down. If Texas Tech does that to Dante Moore, what is Oregon's shot at that point? Because not saying Dante Moore can't come back from that or can't recover, but it makes it a lot more dicey. And I think part of the reason Texas Tech is first in the country in rush yards allowed per game defensively, they've only given up 68.5 yards per game on the ground. That's remarkable. Part of that reason is because they're up 34-10, and teams have to throw in the second half, so they're not running the ball much. But part of that reason is that run game is really good. Now, if Oregon, they can run on anybody. They've shown that they could run on the best run defense teams in the country. If Oregon can get a push on Texas Tech and run the ball, stay balanced, and then at that point, they can also throw the ball. Like if they can be balanced, they can set Dante Moore up to really make some big plays. This is the number 1 in Oregon and number 2 in Texas Tech teams in the country in explosive plays. I think if Oregon can stay relatively balanced, run the ball well, not go for 200 on the ground, but if they can go for 130, I think they would probably win the game. But at that point, Texas Tech's a really damn good team, man.
Yeah, I go back and forth because I do think the idea that Oregon has played teams as good as Texas Tech bodes really well for them. They've been tested. They've played elite defenses. They've played elite offenses. They've played really good coaching staffs. Like I love the idea of that, and that really does make me feel confident with playing last week, with having the experience. I think this year, I really feel confident. But then on the flip side, with Texas Tech, I think they have a chip on their shoulder. I think a lot of people are doubting Texas Tech. I think a lot of people still aren't giving them the credit they deserve for how dominant of a season they've played this year. I think they are better than people give them credit for. And I do think that with Oregon losing all these staffers, there is a world where, who knows, after you get that big first win, and this could be fandom fear here, but they get that big JMU win, you have a week and a half off. Like, who's to say that they didn't spend a little bit of that time recruiting for their new schools, spend a little bit of that time thinking about the transfer portal for those new schools, getting comfortable by beating JMU, and you go into this game and not all of your coaching, in fact, the majority of your coaching staff had their minds elsewhere. You come into this game a little unprepared, a little lackadaisical, and when you play a really good team, unprepared and lackadaisical, it can go south really quick. So I really go back and forth between those two concepts because I don't think statistically there's much of an edge that you can really fall into and be really confident that's going to work out that way. So I go with the narratives of like, is Texas Tech, how angry and prepped are they going to be? Did the bye week hurt them? And for Oregon, how focused were you after that JMU game? Were you focused? Were you not? Where's your coaching staff minds at? And unfortunately, that's something we'll never know until after the game.
Kickoff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and I agree with you. I will say, from what Tosh Lupoy and the staff at Oregon have been saying this week before they flew out to Miami, was that second half against JMU was really good for practice for the last week and a half. And I personally, Dan Lanning is a Kirby Smart, Nick Saban disciple. If one of those guys' teams played against JMU in the second half the way Oregon did, how do you think those teams would come out the next week? Hair on fire. Now, hair on fire sometimes leads to targeting or a missed tackle because the guy's running too hard, or like an interception because you're trying to make a play. But hair on fire also means you're amped, you're ready to go. I fully expect to see that from Oregon, especially the defense that has a chip on their shoulder from the way they finished that game against JMU. Now, path to winning for both teams. Texas Tech, show us you're legit. And it's not just because you played the Big 12. You have some of the best players in the country. If you get up on Oregon early, then you can send your entire defense at them, make Dante more uncomfortable, and then start forcing turnovers. If you get behind or give up 5 yards of play on against the run, then Oregon can probably gash you. Especially because then if you start giving up 3, 4, 5 yard runs, then there's going to be a D'Air Hill 15-yard run. There's going to be a Jordan Davison 20-yard run. And all of a sudden, that's where Dante is going to get the easier windows to throw to. For Oregon, I really think the Oregon offense is going to be in a good spot. I'm not saying they're going to score 40. I think it's probably a game played in the 20 to 35s for both teams. Defensively, if you can keep Texas Tech from running the ball, then man, if you can put Bear Morton in that offense in 3rd and 7s and 3rd and 6, they like to throw the ball. A lot of their principles are from the air raid principles. If you force them into those and start forcing them into they'll make some plays, they'll make some explosives because that's how good they are. But you can also force them into some mistakes. So I think those are the two routes of winning for both teams. I don't know which one's going to happen.
This game is going to be very tight, and I can almost guarantee it's going to come down to the last possession or two. Someone get a key touchdown or somebody get a key stop. I feel like that will probably determine the outcome of this game.
Like a 35 to 38 type of game.
Yeah.
But hey, look, it's funny because I don't think the listeners, our listeners know at this point who we follow, who we're a fan of. In terms of us going up, Oregon going up and playing a team that we couldn't love more is really disappointing. Like, couldn't Oregon go play like Alabama? Like, why are they going up against Joey McGuire and the Red Raiders? And now we're gonna have to be forced to hate them. All right, Rose Bowl time. This is the game I was at last year when Oregon lost to Ohio State pretty badly. Alabama playing Indiana. Indiana is a 6.5 point favorite. This is Thursday at 4 Eastern. Tomorrow at 4 Eastern on ESPN. This is a weird game. Like, genuinely a weird game. This game has, I found this from CBS Sports, comparison between the two programs. Alabama has almost 400 more wins all time. They have 18 national championships. Indiana has 0. They have 34 conference championships. Indiana has 3. They have about 64 more bowl appearances. They have 3 more Heisman winners, 300 more NFL draft picks. They've been ranked. The weeks ranked at number 1. Alabama has 141 weeks. Indiana has 1. Like, the team comparisons between these two is just funny. Just, it's more like of a reflection of how good a job Kursignetti's done at Indiana in just 2 years
Absolutely.
to put them where they are.
Let me add to that too. The Kurt Signetti here. Alabama's blue chip ratio, so 4 and 5 stars on the Alabama roster, 73%. And that's composite. It's 89% if you do just 24/7. Indiana's blue chip ratio, 8%. Singular 8.
Oh my God.
So Alabama, they have the brand, they have the history, they have the money, they have the talent. Single tell they have, except for the way they play on the field this season. Again, testament to Kurt Signetti and just how awesome Indiana has been this season. How his turnaround is genuinely unprecedented. And as Josh Pate had said, like we all acknowledge how great what Kurt Signetti has done is, and everyone's very impressed by it. But he's like, I don't think we're talking about the fact that this is arguably the greatest and most impressive coaching job in the history of the sport in terms of the program he took over and how quickly he got it to being a national championship, not just like contender, but a favorite, is unbelievable. It takes most guys 4+ years to go from being a good program that's 6-6 to being a national championship contender. He took arguably one of the worst programs in all of Power 4/Power 5 history, maybe the worst, and built them into the number 1 seed in the college football playoff within 2 seasons. Unbelievable.
I completely agree. Now, I guess the trick is there. We'll see how sustainable it is for him, because a lot of these guys were his guys at JMU. But that's not to poo-poo on anything he's done. The work he's done has been incredible. He's a Heisman winner in year 2. All right. In terms of the game itself, Jace, Alabama was my SEC champion. Alabama I had going deep in the playoffs, and then the season happened, and it confused me. Indiana, neither of us had making the playoffs, and then the season happened. I don't know how many more times I can doubt Kursignetti, but I think one of the detractions of Texas Tech is that team, that coaching staff has never been to this stage before. So them going up against Oregon, an Oregon team that has a chip on their shoulder from last year, just getting humiliated on the biggest stage on New Year's Day, they might be running into just a brick wall. Like, Oregon's going to be just ready. Now, Indiana, you can't say that about, because that was them last year. They lost in the first round last year, but that was their first time on this stage. Now we see Kursignetti rolling out that team. I know they had the bye, but they are going to be ready. With that said, on the other side, Alabama played last week. Alabama's fresher. Alabama just has the momentum. They were down a bunch, but they came back. That offense, the last time we saw that offense, it looked really good. I thought we were going to come on the show and talk about like edges of like Indiana just being wire to wire really good and Alabama struggling, but now I think it's closer, once again, closer than people think. Where do we start with this?
This is like the opposite of the Oregon Texas Tech game to me. Like I mentioned earlier, the Oregon Texas Tech game is I don't really see an edge. Therefore, if I can find any singular edge, it's going to make me want to pick one way or the other. This is a game where I feel like each team has clear cut, obvious edges, and there's so many edges that go so obviously one way or the other. It's like, okay, now it's the balancing act of all of these. I'll start with this in Alabama's and their losses to Florida State, and then their start of the year, and then their loss to Georgia recently in the SEC championship game. They were outgained by 140 yards roughly in each of those games on the ground. We've said it all year. Alabama, the big flaw, the big issues, they aren't able to run the ball. I leave out the Oklahoma loss because Oklahoma is an air raid offense, so rushing stats just don't really make sense win or lose in those games. That's where I think it starts for me. It's supposed to be, as of now, it's supposed to be a very rainy day at the Rose Bowl. We'll see how that lasts. But if that's the case, throwing the football gets tough. Luckily for Indiana, they can run the ball pretty damn well. They have a good offensive line. They have Hembry is a good running back. Mendoza can run with his legs a little bit too. Alabama has not proven once this entire season that they can run the football effectively against a good defensive line, good defensive front. Sorry, I don't want to discredit Aiden Fisher there. Alabama, if it's pouring rain, they're going to have to figure out some semblance of a run game. I don't know if that's a quick screen game to wide receivers, even to supplement that, but Alabama can't go into this game thinking, we have more size, we have more talent. I think we can just probably throw it all over the yard and maybe beat these guys, because that's not going to fly, especially if it's raining. Indiana, it's really easy to overlook them. I think Oregon overlooked their physicality. I think Ohio State probably overlooked their physicality. And in both games, they got punched in the mouth and they thought they could probably get back up and punch them. But Indiana was the aggressor in both of those games. Alabama, no matter how much more talent they have, how much more size, I think you can't overlook the fact that you need to establish yourselves at the line of scrimmage on the offensive end. You need to figure out a way to either run the ball or supplement it with quick passes. And you need to find some rhythm, because if Ty Simpson doesn't have a lot of rhythm, if he's under pressure and now he's throwing every single down, that's the recipe for Indiana beating you by 30. It's how Alabama got blown out by Georgia, which is the most recent game on film, I guess second most recent game on film for Indiana. But that was a recipe for disaster, and Indiana has every ability to do that to you that Georgia did. So if you're Alabama, it's going to start offensively at the line of scrimmage, setting the tone early right there.
Completely agree. I think one of those reasons, and I don't have to you don't have to be a football savant to know this, but one of the reasons that you end up getting rolled like they did against Georgia is because if you can't run the ball, you're forcing your quarterback into more 3rd and 7s, 3rd and 6s, 3rd and 8s, 3rd and 9s, 3rd and 10s. That man, if he doesn't make the play, you just went on a 3 and out. That other team that you punted the ball back to is able to run the ball, so they're able to have sustained drives. Even if they don't score, they're making your defense tired while you're when you get the ball back, you go 3 and out again. Your offense isn't able to get into rhythm, and your defense is all exhausted. So if Alabama comes out the way they did in the first quarter against Oklahoma, or throughout the game against Georgia, man, I don't think this game is going to be particularly close. Like you said, it's going to be raining down here in Southern California at the Rose Bowl. At least that's what the weather says. It was said it was going to be pouring rain on Christmas Day, and it was bright sunshine. I think Santa helped us with that. But in general, I think Alabama's defense, because the offense has gotten so much hate, has been almost underrated at this point. I think the offense not being as good as we thought it would be all year has probably put the defense in a worse situation throughout some games and put them on the field longer, made them more tired. I don't know. I think Indiana has the juice, has the players, and has the coaching to just put a hurting on Alabama. I just think look, maybe it's the brand still. Maybe I just need to get it into my head that it's not the same old Alabama. But I just know that it's somewhere in there for them to unlock, and they might have unlocked it in that second half against Oklahoma. That's what I'm holding on to, I think, because look, I don't know. I don't know who's going to win this game. I don't know what my pick's going to be yet, but I've doubted Chris Ignetti all year, and I'm probably going to keep doing it until he finally loses one and I get it right.
This feels like to me the game, if Alabama wins this, or sorry, if Indiana wins this game, it feels like this is what's going to set Indiana on that warpath to winning a national championship. Because as I mentioned a couple podcasts ago, Indiana seems to have that dark magic going for them where just every time they need a big play, it just always happens. It just, and like, yes, they're great plays, but they also, you could kind of like the Omar Cooper toe tap in the end zone. Phenomenal play, but you can't rely on that to happen every single time. The amount of Eli Surratt push offs that he's gotten away with and catches crazy touchdowns, it's just like at some point that's not going to happen. But if they get past this one, it feels like it's okay. That's just how that they're just that good. And then I feel like they're going to roll the way down. I will say something interesting about the Alabama O line. So on the other end of it, Stephen Daly, the defensive lineman for Indiana, who's been
Yes.
fantastic this season, got hurt like celebrating and high-fiving fans after the Ohio State game. Indiana, terrible story, and you feel awful for the kid. He's a big part of this defense, and in all of their big games, he's been maybe the most dominant defensive line player that they've had. This will be their first game without him. And part of Alabama's game script, like I said, is going to have to be established in the offensive line of scrimmage. It becomes a lot easier to do that when the other team's best defensive lineman is not going to be playing. So the combination of you're playing your first game without him and you're playing your first game in 4 weeks, what does the defensive line look like? How do they come out? And then on the other side, the Alabama D-line, LT Overton, was very good this season. He's a former 5-star recruit. Kind of got hurt, I believe, at the very end of November, didn't play against Georgia. He's back. See, that's a huge piece that you get back now in this game. We didn't see him against Oklahoma. So Alabama's getting a player that they're familiar with that they haven't had their last 2 games. So that's kind of a big swing. Omar Cooper is 100%. Sorry, I'm just going through this was probably the most interesting injury report of any of the games. So just some notable things to continue thinking about as this game becomes more impossible to predict no matter how you look at it.
I think the only question I have for you in general for this game is we've said it all year, and not just us, people around the country have said it. Indiana might be this year's version of Oregon last year, just wire to wire good. Like, not that they've gotten better or peaking at a certain time, but they've just been good from the first snap until the final whistle of the Ohio State game. Now they've had 28 days off. Is Indiana the most likely or just not at all team to show their rust compared to a Texas Tech or an Ohio State or a Georgia? Like, which of those teams do you think? Like, yeah, actually, let me answer. I know that's dumb of me to ask you and then answer myself.
No, I like it.
I feel like Kurt Signetti has some, like you said, some just magic up his sleeve that just makes the rust not happen, excluding possibilities of real life magic happening in a human world. I wonder if that's a possibility.
I think it is. And this is the team I do think that would be most vulnerable to that rust for a few reasons. Number one, Kirby Smart in Georgia. I can't pick Kirby Smart. And then Ryan Day, Ohio State. You can't really pick Ryan Day. And I think Texas Tech is they've been so consistent, and they've really, I was going to say they haven't been tested. I think they've played good teams. They just have consistently destroyed these good teams. So I do think Indiana is most likely to be subject to that. Also for the reason, like I said, their blue chip ratio is 8%. That kind of tells me that they are getting, every single player is playing at their ceilings. And that also kind of tells me that schematically they've been damn near perfect all season. And when you don't play for 28 days, in those 3 stars and below, when they've been playing at their ceilings all year, when they get a 4-week rest, you don't know how those guys are going to come out. And if those guys aren't playing at their ceiling, you're going to feel the talent difference between that and a 5-star D tackle from Alabama. That's going to show itself quickly. When the scheme isn't perfect, maybe the scheme takes a drop, or maybe now that they've played 13 games, Alabama has a good how does this team respond? Like, how do they respond if they find themselves in scenarios where Jeremy Bernard and Ryan Williams have one-on-ones on the outside with 3-star and less corners? That they could struggle in those scenarios. So I do think the opportunity for them to lay an egg is more prevalent than it is for the other 3 bye-week teams.
That's the concern I would have if I was Indiana, because I think they've shown us no reason to doubt them. They've shown us no reason to choose against them. They've shown us that they are an incredible football team that knows how to win games, from the coaching staff to the players themselves. I just wonder, is there any validity to them being last year's Oregon version? And let's get to the Sugar Bowl final game. This is Thursday night at 8 Eastern on ESPN. Ole Miss heading to play Georgia. Georgia's a 6.5-point favorite. Sugar Bowl is played in New Orleans. And then the winner of that plays in the Fiesta Bowl in Glendale, Arizona, not Glendale, LA, on Thursday, January 8th. So all these games are deciding the semifinals of the college football playoff that will be played next week. Okay, I think you and I talked about it a little bit. Ole Miss, Georgia. We've seen this game happen once already this year. We thought at the beginning of the year when they played with Lane Kiffin as the head coach of Ole Miss, there was a part of me that was like, man, Ole Miss might not blow them out, but this might be an uncomfortable score. And then Georgia ended up coming back. They didn't punt. They won the game. It was a one-score win, but it was the exact reason that this spread is a 6.5-point spread. It was that difference. Now, a lot's gone on. We don't have to repeat everything that's happened, but Pete Golding's the head coach of Ole Miss now. And Ole Miss looks still like the juggernaut that we've seen all year with Pete Golding as head coach against Tulane. What I wonder, and I don't know, is I have two feels on this. Either Ole Miss is real and the talent is just really good, the scheme is really good, and Pete Golding has that team playing at an all-time high because their coach left them, so they're all jilted, or this is going to be the first sign of cracks we see in Ole Miss because this is Pete Golding, and I'm sure he'll eventually be a good head coach, but this could be a Pete Golding taking over Lane Kiffin type team kind of situation where something falls apart and Georgia kind of manhandles them. I don't know which of those Ole Misses is going to show up.
I'm going to ride the momentum wave with Ole Miss, and they looked phenomenal against Tulane, offensively and defensively. They seem to be playing almost like the Lane Kiffin scenario, like truly fired them up and like really kind of rallied them with each other and under Pete Golding because they looked great. They looked focused. They looked motivated in that game. I'm going to ride their momentum wave and say at the very least they come out and look really good. Like you mentioned, that first matchup that was in Athens, it was an 8-point game. It was basically just trading touchdowns. I don't know how many non-touchdowns, maybe like 4 drives did not end in a touchdown in that game total. I kind of expect something similar. I know one key note too, just also with the injury report, Juan Lacey and Daquan Wright are going to both probable and most likely going to be playing for Ole Miss in this game. They haven't had Wright in a couple games, and Lacey, we saw him go down late in that Tulane game. Same with Trinidad. It sounds like he's good. He came back in that game anyways, but so they're good there. My big key to the game for Ole Miss, I think offensively, I feel comfortable with them. So my one key for them offensively is going to be to start fast. If there's a chance to catch Kirby Smart in Georgia in some version of a funk or catch them slow, it's going to be not playing football for 28 days. Game 1, playing against them when you just played last week, week and a half ago, you looked great. Start fast. See if you can get out here, score on the first 2 drives of the game. See if you can get a stop on Georgia. See if your defense can start fast and get a stop or 2 early to try to build a comfortable lead. Because Georgia, we've seen them a few times this year start slow in games. Now they almost always finish really strong, which is why you never count out Kirby. But they have been prone to slow starts, which could bode well for Ole Miss here.
And their game against Ole Miss earlier in the regular season required a comeback. Not that they started slow, but Ole Miss started out blazing hot. And I think that's the question about Ole Miss in general. How much of that offense is just going to keep lasting the way it is until we see any bit of cracks with them? Is Georgia going to be able to? Are they riding the wave of momentum from the SEC title game? And then, by the way, who's their head coach? It's Kirby damn Smart. Like, guys, I don't think you realize Kirby has had his team hitting every day since the SEC title game. They've been playing football. Like, some of these coaches probably have had times off. We've seen Oregon, they had mock games, like everything from like the motorcycle driving out onto the field to all the music, shout playing, all the music playing. They've tried to have mock games, make it real football. In general, I just wonder, like, I don't think Georgia would be one of those teams that shows rust. I think we're going to confuse a less explosive offense for rust, and I don't think that's right. I think Georgia's not necessarily like, I'm going to go score every time, but I'm going to bully you. I'm going to try to run the ball. Gunnar Stockton's going to make some plays. And what did we say in the SEC title game? For whatever reason, they weren't making huge explosive plays, but every time Gunnar Stockton dropped back, he had an easy completion. And that was against a much better defense than Ole Miss. say what you want about Alabama. That was a much better defense. I just wonder if Mike Bobo and Georgia start Gunnar Stockton and that offense out with easy completions, getting them into rhythm, if we're just not going to see a repeat of the last time these two squared off.
Yeah, you're exactly right. When they squared off last time, they ran the ball with ease. From snap 1 to snap 80, they ran the ball all over Ole Miss with multiple backs easily. And then that led to play action. And then Gunnar Stockton's rolling out. He either's going to run for 7 yards or he had a tight end, on a crosser for 10 plus. Like, it just felt so easy. And I go back and forth on, does it being that easy the first time around, is it so obvious that Georgia's going to stick to that game plan that if you're Ole Miss, you're like, hey, this is exactly what they did against us. It destroyed us. They're going to do it again, so let's game plan for it. I can't tell if that almost gives Ole Miss that edge. And, when people say it's hard to beat the same team twice, this is kind of a reason why. Or if Georgia's going to say, I don't care if you know what we're going to do because I know you can't stop us because I know our O-line's more dominant. I know, you can't stop our tight ends. And they just do it again, and they just don't punt again because they did not punt once in that first matchup. So I go back and forth on who has the edge now because of it.
To be honest with you, I just truly believe that you want to win games no matter what. And coaches sometimes, even though their mental health probably can't take it, they love it when they win. They love it when they win ugly. And I know you said that they didn't punt once, but they gave up a ton of points, and that's not Kirby Smart's MO. So he's been living ever since that game of like, man, we gave up 38 in a regular season game. That's unacceptable. So that's number one on chip on your shoulder. Number two, Kirby Smart and Georgia will never admit this, but when the playoff was announced and Ole Miss was playing Tulane, man, Kirby and them were preparing for Ole Miss. So now Georgia's been preparing for Ole Miss for 2.5, 3 weeks. Ole Miss had to prepare for Tulane first amidst a coaching change, amidst offensive coordinators and assistants coming from LSU because Lane Kiffin signed their like release forms or whatever. Like it's a field trip to go coach Ole Miss for a week. Dude, it's just it's a sideshow that's happening there. That's why I wonder. That's the questions I had is, was their performance against Tulane for real, or are we going to start seeing cracks because this is against P4 competition, especially against the team they just lost to?
That's the $1 million question, and that's probably the one we will find out on New Year's Day night. However, before we get into watching any of these games, I think we need to pick some games. I also think we need to set some clarity. Do we want to pick money lines? Do we want to pick spreads, or do we want to do both? Because there's only 4 games, so do we want to do a little bit of both?
You can say both. I think for these playoff games, it matters more who we pick to win rather than the spreads. But you can say who if anyone's going to cover or whatnot. All right. So that's all of our breakdown so far. If you agree or disagree, please feel free to shout us out for that, whatever you want. Let's get into our picks. Cotton Bowl, Miami versus Ohio State tonight, 7:30 Eastern. Ohio State's a 9.5-point favorite. This game's on ESPN. Jace, who do you got?
I'm going to go with Ohio State to win this game. I do think Miami will cover. So 9.5, that's a lot of points. I think Miami's got a good enough D-line. I think their O-line can run the football. I don't know if it's enough. It's hard to bet against Jeremiah Smith. It's hard to bet against Caleb Downs, Carnell Tate. Name any superstar on that roster. I'm going to go Buckeyes to win, Miami to cover.
It's hard to bet against them, but watch me. I'm going to take Miami to win. I'm going to take Miami to cover. I think Mario Cristobal and his team have been on a warpath since losing to SMU, and I think everyone who's detracting Carson Beck, saying that he can't play quarterback, they don't trust him, doesn't want to take into account last week's game you were unable to throw the ball, and Beck at least was able to manage the game. That run game offensive line is really good. You're right. You can't. It's really hard to bet against Ohio State, and that's why I kept asking you and our listeners: did Ryan Day master the playoff 2.0 State self? Because if that's the case, Ohio State's going to win this 31-10. But if Miami can run the ball and get after Julian Sayin at least a little bit, I think we have a much closer game. I'm going to take Miami to win, Miami to cover. Orange Bowl time. Oregon's a 2.5-point favorite. I guess it's not at Texas Tech, Texas Tech is the home team because they're the higher seed. But Oregon's a 2.5-point favorite at Texas Tech in Miami, Thursday, 12 Eastern on ESPN. Base, who do we got?
I am going to go with the Red Raiders to win this game, and then obviously that means they would cover. It hurts to go against the Ducks. I just think, as much as I love Joey McGuire, and so it killed me to pick against him as well, but I think they've been dominant for a reason. Well, both of them. How dominant they've been this year, I think it means something. And I struggle to see a team that's been that dominant and also been doubted for the last month. They just had to sit here for 28 days listening to the doubt. They haven't played anybody with this much speed. They haven't played anybody this good. I think that means something to this team. I think this is a team that's going to come out and play good football. I think they're going to play a really good 60 minutes. I think the edge is going to be Oregon. Yes, they can run the football, and they have really good running backs. They rely on two true freshmen a lot. And with a team that punches the football as well as Texas Tech does, I can see a world where they get a big punch out on a freshman Oregon running back late in the game, changes the game all over. I also think Oregon losing as many the amount of staffers they've lost in the last 2 weeks, it does make me concerned about the focus in the building and where everyone's heads at.
All right. I don't disagree with you on most of that, but I'm still going to take Oregon to win. I'm going to take Oregon to cover by winning. I genuinely believe, and this isn't bias, Oregon's just a better football team. Oregon's more fresh. They're not rusty. I also think the last couple of weeks have probably been hell for the team after their second half showing against JMU. And more importantly than anything, if Dan Lanning and his staff, and I know they're losing most of their staff, but if Dan Lanning and his staff really took last year's loss to Ohio State to heart on January 1st of last year in the Rose Bowl, that they didn't show up ready to go. They were rusty. Ohio State, before you knew it, was up 34-0. If Dan Lanning and his staff took that loss to heart and really made changes to set the team up to be as good as possible and peak at the end of the season, peak in the playoff, I don't think this is going to be a close game at that point. If any of that's true, I'm not saying this is a blowout at all. I'm more so saying it feels like a 30-17, 30-21 type of game. Give me the Ducks to win. Give me the Ducks to cover. Maybe that's copium. I appreciate you going with the emotional hedge. I'm backing the team. We'll see if they do win, if I can back them next week. But I promise you that wasn't biased. That was just how I see these two teams stacking up. Rose Bowl time. This game broke my heart last year. Alabama going to play Indiana, 6.5-point favorite. Tomorrow, 4 Eastern on ESPN. Jace, who do we got?
We're doing the thing, Farbode. We're doing the thing where we doubt Curt Cignetti and then he wins. I'm going to roll with Alabama money line, which obviously would mean that they would cover. I think at some point the magic's going to end for Indiana. It's hard to see it go for 16 straight games. I think Alabama's playing better. That second half against Oklahoma made me feel like they started to figure their team out a little bit. I also really like the edge that they might have on the offensive line with Daly not playing. If Alabama can figure something out, I think they have the power, the size, the speed, the skill, where if Indiana decides to come out a little rusty, not the size, but it happens, it could be a tough team to come back on. I'm going to go with the Tide here. A little upset. We've
seen Kalen DeBoer's best teams play their best on the West Coast when he was at Washington. He's not from the West Coast. I don't know why, but he's been a Washington coach. He's been a Fresno State coach. Those teams have been damn good. He has experience coaching in the Rose Bowl. By the way, one thing I didn't mention in the breakdown of these games, both of these staffs have guys on their staff that have coached for the other team. Kalen DeBoer, Kane Womack, and I think a couple of their offensive staffers were on the Indiana staff. And Chris Cignetti was on Nick Saban's Alabama staff years ago. That's kind of a funny, just random stat.
A lot of overlap on these two teams.
Yeah. I'm so happy you took Alabama, man, because I just figured if I took Alabama and you took Indiana, I was going to be the asshole on Sunday on our recap show, and I was going to be like, I messed up. I'm going to take Alabama to win and cover. I'm going to hope and pray. Not hope and pray. That's the wrong word. I'm not rooting for either team. I'm hoping and pray for a good game, but I think Alabama is going to win and cover. They're going to feed off the momentum from that second half against Oklahoma. I fully understand Indiana's defense is really good. I understand that Indiana's defense has put Dante Moore and Julian Sane in a blender that they hadn't been in all season or after they played them. With that said, I don't think Alabama is unprepared to go up against that defense, having played their last 3 games have been Oklahoma, Georgia, and Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're ready.
I agree.
Sure.
I think this is they've seen good defenses. They've seen tricky defenses. They've seen Venables twice. And Venables is as similar as you're going to get to this Indiana defense.
Right. Sugar Bowl time. Ole Miss, Georgia. Georgia's a 6.5-point favorite. Thursday, 8 Eastern on ESPN. I said it again. Jace, who do we got to win and cover?
I'm going to be the idiot for you. I'm going to pick Ole Miss to actually come out on
Why
top
is that an
and
idiot?
win this game. Because they're going to lose, and then I'll look goofy. Just kidding. They're not going to lose. They're going to win. I'm going to take Ole Miss to win this football game, which would obviously mean they cover. I think there's some truth to that first game in Athens. Georgia won that football game by 8, which makes me feel good about the cover here on a neutral site. But I do think that Georgia's offense, when it clicks, it's the exact same every time. There's not a lot of room for it to be dynamic. They don't beat you in many different ways. They beat you in one way, but they do it really well. I think I trust Ole Miss to at least have some ability to make them punt at least once. I don't think that Georgia's offense is. Here's what it comes down to. I trust Ole Miss's offense to repeat a 35 more than I trust Georgia's offense to repeat a 43. I also think Georgia comes into this game with 4 defensive starters that are not playing in this game, that have been hurt between the SEC championship game and now. Give me the combination of 4 starters out, the rust, and I think Ole Miss is going to make some key adjustments. I'm going to roll Trinidad in Ole Miss.
So it's funny because the coach that I choose to doubt is always Kurt Signetti, and the coach I always choose not to doubt is Kirby Smart. And the coach that you say you choose not to doubt is Kirby Smart. I'm going to take Georgia to win. I'm going to take Georgia to cover the 6.5. I actually disagree. I don't think that Ole Miss is more likely to repeat the 35. I think that's fine if they look. It's fine if Georgia doesn't repeat the 40. It's because I think this game is going to be like a 29, 30 to 21, 30 to 23 type game. I think Ole Miss is going to be in the low 20s, and that might be shocking. But I just genuinely believe that there's been a chip on their shoulder at Georgia, and the wheels might fall off for this Ole Miss team this year.
I hope that we get both of us to be true, because I think if we get a world where Ole Miss's offense is clicking, but then Georgia's offense is still clicking, and it comes down to another 38-38, who's going to get the last stop and score? When you're like tired, DoorDash is on its way, you're still hungover from New Year's Day, you're on the couch, I want a 38-38 game with 2 minutes left. Like, all right, let's see who makes this big play next. So I hope that we're both right in our predictions for how these coaches and these teams come out and play.
I completely agree. I mentioned this to you earlier over the phone. I know people have hate towards the first round of the playoff because of the G5 being in there. But these matchups is why they expanded the playoff. Look how great of a matchup we are heading into with Miami, Ohio State, Oregon, Texas Tech, Alabama, Indiana, Ole Miss, Georgia. The only one of those we've seen so far this year is Ole Miss, Georgia. The rest of them are going to be phenomenal matchups across conferences and just a way to celebrate the sport. So I'm so excited. I know, Jace, you'll probably be solo on our recap show, but I will try to do my best to at least send you some takes. I hope everybody out there has a ton of fun watching football. Make sure you stay safe this New Year's and New Year's Eve. Drink a little bit if you want. If you don't, have some fun. Any New Year's resolutions for you, Jace?
That might have to wait till my recap show. I'll answer it for you then.
All right, my New Year's resolution is I hope everybody subscribes to Flag for Discussion, spelled out on YouTube, follows us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts at Flag for Discussion. I hope you also that you check us out on Twitter at F4Discussion, and maybe look us up on TikTok at Flag4Discussion. It's been a ton of fun having everybody back on this show. It's always just much more energy when we're both on. Thank you so much for tuning in. From myself, Farbod Merkazi, my lovely partner, Jace Hatfield, this has been Flag for Discussion.